Hello, I'm Arthur Reed. Welcome to the World War II History Channel, where we explore the pivotal moments and untold stories of the greatest generation. Long before the great iron ships arrived to break the silence, the Pacific Ocean spoke only in the language of the wind, the soft murmur of the tides, and the gentle rustle of palm fronds leaning toward a white coral shore. If you were to look down from the stars back then, you would see nothing but an endless blanket of deep, velvet blue, dotted here and there by tiny, fragile wreaths of emerald and silver. One of these small ribbons of sand was a place called Betio, a quiet crescent of land resting peacefully within the warm embrace of the Tarawa Atoll. For generations, life here moved to a slow, ancient rhythm, entirely detached from the heavy, mechanical rumblings of a world rushing toward a great and terrible conflict. The nights were vast, dark, and still, illuminated only by a brilliant canopy of stars that seemed to watch over the isolated island like a protective blanket. It was a place where time itself felt like an illusion, stretching out into the quiet horizon where the sky and the water became one. But distance, no matter how vast, can never truly hide a place from the long, reaching shadows of history. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the modern world began to drift toward this secluded paradise. The first changes were small, quiet shifts in the air. A distant smudge of gray smoke on the horizon, the foreign drone of an engine high above the clouds, and the sudden, unsettling arrival of men with heavy boots and blueprints. These men looked at the beautiful coral paradise and did not see a sanctuary. Instead, they saw lines on a map, a tiny, vital stepping stone across the immense, empty highway of the Pacific. To the planners sitting in distant, well-lit rooms thousands of miles away, this little island was an unsinkable airfield, a crucial doorway that needed to be locked, or broken open, depending on the uniform they wore. On the island itself, young Japanese soldiers began to arrive, leaving behind their own quiet villages, their families, and the misty green mountains of home. Many of them were barely more than boys, carrying small wooden boxes containing a lock of a mother's hair, or a simple stitched belt of 1,000 stitches, given to them by neighbors to protect them from harm. They found themselves in a strange, flat world of blinding white sand and unrelenting tropical heat, surrounded by an ocean that seemed to separate them entirely from everything they had ever known. In the quiet evenings, as the sun dipped below the waves in brilliant shades of amber and violet, these young men would sit along the shore, listening to the gentle wash of the tide. They wrote long, carefully worded letters home, assuring their parents that they were eating well, asking if the cherry blossoms had bloomed early that spring, and gently veiling the deep, aching loneliness that settled into their bones whenever the night grew cold. To keep the loneliness at bay, these young defenders found comfort in small, quiet routines and the simple bond of shared exile. They shared dried fruit saved from their meager rations, sang soft folk songs under the shade of the coconut trees, and helped each other construct deep, reinforced bunkers out of heavy coconut logs and crushed coral sand. They worked with a quiet, tireless dedication, not out of a desire for violence, but out of a simple, universal human longing to protect one another and to survive. They did not know when the storm would arrive, or what form it would take, but as the months bled together in the tropical heat, a heavy, unspoken understanding settled over the island. They were entirely alone in the great blue expanse, and their only certainty lay in the strength of the sandbags they stacked and the quiet resilience of the friends standing beside them. Thousands of miles across the water, another group of young men was also preparing to journey toward this exact same speck of coral. On board crowded, swaying transport ships and in dusty training camps scattered across the American coast, thousands of young Marines spent their nights in the heavy, humid darkness of crowded barracks. There were farm boys from Iowa, city kids from New York, and quiet dreamers from the deep South, brought together by a shared duty and a common, underlying fear of the unknown. They spent their days checking and rechecking their gear, cleaning their rifles until the steel gleamed in the dim light, and learning the names of islands they had never heard of before. But it was in the quiet hours of the late night, when the training was over and the loud, boisterous laughter of the day had faded into soft breathing, that the true human story of the expedition unfolded. In the dim light of a single, swinging bulb, a young private would sit on his bunk, balancing a small writing pad on his knees. He would write to his high school sweetheart, his words hesitant and tender, trying to capture the warmth of a life that felt farther away with every passing wave. He wouldn't write about war, or tactics, or the heavy weight of the pack on his shoulders. Instead, he would write about the taste of fresh milk, the sound of rain on the roof of his childhood home, and his quiet promise to be back before the winter snows. These letters were fragile, precious lifelines thrown across a vast ocean, holding onto the simple, beautiful hope that a world of peace was still waiting for them on the other side of the horizon. As the great armada began to assemble, casting its long, metallic shadow across the clear blue waters, a strange and beautiful sense of brotherhood began to form among these travelers. In the cramped spaces beneath the decks, men who had been strangers just weeks before now shared their most private thoughts, their fears, and their small tokens of home. A lucky charm, a worn photograph with bent corners, or a simple pocket Bible became communal treasures, passed around with quiet reverence. In these small moments of kindness, the harsh realities of the coming conflict were momentarily softened by the gentle, enduring warmth of human connection. They looked out for one another, mending each other's torn uniforms, sharing a final piece of chocolate, and offering a quiet, reassuring nod whenever the heavy roll of the ship caused a stomach to turn. Preserving these fragile, human moments from the deep fog of time takes a quiet, dedicated kind of care. The story of Tarawa is not just a history of strategies and ships, but a vast collection of thousands of individual heartbeats, private thoughts, and quiet acts of devotion that deserve to be remembered just as they were experienced. It takes countless hours of patient research to sift through the old letters, the faded journals, and the forgotten memories to bring these voices back to life for you each night. If you find comfort in these peaceful retellings, and if they help you find a sense of calm and rest in the quiet hours, please consider supporting this journey with a small tip on Ko-Fi. Even a single dollar helps sustain the immense time, care, and love required to craft these soothing historical journeys for you. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a simple, beautiful way to help keep these quiet stories alive, ensuring that the names and the gentle spirits of those who came before us are never truly lost to the passing of the years. As the days grew shorter and the distance between the two opposing forces began to close, the great, silent machinery of the Pacific campaign began to lock into place. The ships moved with a slow, deliberate grace across the water, their wake leaving long, silver trails that glowed softly under the moonlight. On board, the initial nervousness of the young men began to mature into a deep, focused calm. They had accepted their place in this grand, unfolding drama, and as the tropical breeze blew cool against their faces, many found a strange kind of peace in the sheer vastness of the ocean around them. They realized that beneath the differing uniforms, the different languages, and the immense distances that separated their homes, they were all just fragile human beings, suspended between the quiet beauty of the natural world and the uncertain shadow of tomorrow. Back on the tiny island of Betio, the night before the first ships would appear on the horizon was unusually beautiful. The wind had died down to a gentle whisper, and the small waves lapped against the white coral sand with a rhythmic, hypnotic sound that felt like a lullaby. The Japanese soldiers stepped out of their dark bunkers for a few brief moments to breathe in the cool, salt air and to look up at the brilliant, unchanging stars. They knew, through a quiet instinct that requires no words, that the long silence of their island paradise was drawing to a close. Yet, in that final, untouched evening, there was no anger, no panic, and no rush. There was only the gentle sigh of the palms, the vast, comforting presence of the deep blue sea, and the quiet, enduring strength of the human spirit, waiting peacefully in the gathering shadows. To understand the true weight of what was to come, one must first understand the profound, almost frightening isolation of a tiny island lost in a world made entirely of water. If you were a traveler drifting across the vast expanse of the Central Pacific all those years ago, you would quickly realize that the ocean is not just an empty space, but a living, breathing entity. It stretches out in every direction, an endless canvas of deep indigo that meets a pale blue sky at a horizon so sharp it looks as though it could cut. Days would pass with nothing but the rhythmic rise and fall of the swells, the occasional flash of silver as a flying fish broke the surface, and the soft, steady hum of the wind. In this immense, beautiful emptiness, a place like the Tarawa Atoll did not feel like a fortress or a strategic prize. It felt like a miracle, a fragile, solitary outpost of life, a tiny green leaf floating on a mirror of infinite blue. For the young men who now found themselves stationed on this microscopic patch of earth, the sheer scale of the geography was a heavy, constant presence in their thoughts. On Betio, the largest islet of the atoll, you could stand in the very center of the island and see the ocean on both sides of you simply by turning your head. It was so narrow, so low to the water, that the spray of the reef often misted the windows of the tents, leaving a fine, white crust of salt on everything it touched. There was nowhere to hide from the vastness of the world. Every morning, the sun would rise directly out of the water, blindingly bright, and every evening it would plunge back into the sea, leaving the young defenders in a darkness so profound that the rest of civilization felt like a dream they had long ago forgotten. Among the Japanese garrison, this sense of isolation bred a unique, quiet kind of endurance. They knew, with a quiet and somber certainty, that no great fleet was coming to reinforce them, and no planes would arrive to carry them away. They were bound to this coral reef, their destinies entirely intertwined with the white sand beneath their feet. Yet, rather than giving in to despair, they channeled their loneliness into a beautiful, meticulous care for their surroundings. A young soldier, perhaps remembering the carefully manicured gardens of Kyoto, spent his rare hours of rest arranging smooth, bleached shells around the entrance of his dugout. It was a tiny, fragile attempt to create order and beauty in a world that was gradually tilting toward chaos. Another soldier found a stray dog on the island, a scruffy, forgotten creature, and shared his meager evening portion of rice with it, finding comfort in the simple, unconditional warmth of a living being that knew nothing of maps or empires. They spent their days handling the raw materials of the island, cutting down the heavy coconut palms that had stood for decades. The wood was fibrous and tough, and as they worked under the fierce tropical sun, the sweet, heavy scent of freshly cut timber filled the air, mixing with the sharp tang of the salt water. They used these logs to build thick, defensive walls, binding them together with iron spikes and covering them with mounds of fine coral sand. To an outside observer, it looked like a frantic construction of war, but to the men working, it was a deeply personal labor. Every log put in place, every bucket of sand poured over a bunker, was a collective promise to the friend standing next to them. It was a way of saying, without words, that they would protect each other when the world finally came crashing down upon their isolated sanctuary. Across the ocean, on the massive steel ships that were slowly drawing closer, the American Marines were experiencing their own version of this infinite blue isolation. Locked inside the steel hulls of the transports, the world had shrunk to the size of a canvas bunk in the narrow, green-painted companionways. The heat below deck was stifling, a thick, heavy blanket of humidity that made sleep a difficult, restless thing. To pass the time, they would crowd onto the open decks at night, looking out at the dark, rolling water. The ocean that separated them from their enemy was the very same ocean that separated them from their mothers, their fathers, and the quiet, safe neighborhoods of their childhoods. In these quiet hours on deck, the differences between the men began to wash away. It did not matter if a man had grown up in a crowded tenement in Chicago or on a lonely ranch in Wyoming. Out here, in the middle of the infinite blue, they were all equally small, equally vulnerable. They talked in low, whispered tones, their voices carried away by the steady rush of the wind against the ship's hull. They spoke of the simple things they missed, the cold weight of a glass of lemonade, the smell of freshly cut grass on a Saturday morning, the sound of a porch swing creaking in the evening breeze. A young corporal, known for his rough exterior during the day, was seen gently comforting a homesick private, sharing a worn comic book and talking softly about the dogs they had left behind. These small moments of tenderness were the true fabric of their lives, a quiet armor against the vast, intimidating emptiness of the sea. As the days crawled by, the tension on board the ships grew, but so too did a profound sense of shared destiny. They looked out at the escorting destroyers and the massive battleships that rode the waves beside them, their silhouettes dark against the twilight sky. These steel giants felt less like weapons of destruction and more like silent, protective guardians, guiding them through the trackless wilderness of the ocean. The Marines looked at the endless horizon and tried to imagine the tiny island that lay somewhere ahead, hidden beneath the curve of the earth. They knew it was small, a mere speck of coral, yet it had become the center of their universe, a gravity well drawing thousands of lives together toward a singular, defining moment in time. Holding onto these deep, human stories of the Pacific, understanding the quiet fears and the soft conversations that took place on both sides of that infinite blue, is a beautiful way to honor the past. It allows us to look past the grand movements of history and see the real, fragile hearts that beat within those distant moments. If you find yourself deeply moved by the quiet resilience of these men and wish to bring a piece of this history into your own quiet space, you can find a wonderful selection of World War II memorabilia, as well as the deeply moving film Midway, available on Amazon Prime. Watching these visual histories or holding a piece of remembrance is a gentle way to keep their memory alive as you drift off to sleep. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a thoughtful way to connect with the past from the comfort of your own home, ensuring that the immense journeys taken across the Pacific are never forgotten. As the final hours of the voyage approached, a strange, expectant hush seemed to settle over the entire ocean. The winds grew soft, and the long, rolling swells became smooth as glass, reflecting the stars above so perfectly that the ships felt as though they were floating through the sky itself. On the island, the defenders slept in their quiet bunkers, their hands resting near their personal treasures, their minds drifting back to the green fields of home. On the ships, the Marines lay on their bunks, listening to the rhythmic creaking of the metal, watching the shadows dance across the ceiling with every tilt of the vessel. There was no hatred in this quiet darkness, no anger burning in the night. There was only a profound, universal human stillness, a collective holding of breath before the curtain rose on the great drama. The speck of coral remained small, hidden in the dark, wrapped in the protective murmur of its reef, while the infinite blue ocean continued to roll on, timeless and serene, cradling the hopes, the fears, and the quiet prayers of thousands of souls waiting for the dawn. There comes a moment when the distant warmth of home fades entirely into the background, replaced by the cool, dark weight of a destiny you cannot see, but can feel approaching with every steady beat of the heart. The ocean on this final night was a mirror of liquid obsidian, vast and unyielding, reflecting a sky crowded with an infinity of quiet stars. To look out from the railing of the transport ships was to stare into a profound emptiness, yet the air itself felt heavy, thick with the unspoken thoughts of thousands of men waiting in the dark. For days, the horizon had been nothing but an endless line where the water met the sky. But now, as the hours drifted toward the fragile edge of dawn, that line began to change. It was no longer empty. One by one, the dark, silent silhouettes of an immense armada began to trace themselves against the starlight, a great, metallic crescent rising from the deep, creating a new and formidable horizon made entirely of steel. Below the decks, and the deep, humming bellies of the ships, the world was a steady and soft contrasts. The regular, rhythmic thrum of the massive engines provided a low, comforting lullaby, a steady vibration that felt like the pulse of some giant, protective creature. In the dim, red glow of the night lights, the young Marines moved with a slow, almost reverent quiet. The boisterous energy of the previous weeks had entirely evaporated, replaced by a gentle, collective focus. Men sat cross-legged on the steel decks, their backs against the bulkheads, using the small, flat surfaces of their helmets as makeshift desks. They were writing their final words to the world outside this steel cocoon, their pens scratching softly across the paper in a rhythmic whisper that sounded like dry leaves drifting across a porch. In those letters, they did not write of global conflicts, grand strategies, or the massive steel horizon that surrounded them. Instead, they reached backward in time, anchoring themselves to the small, beautiful details of ordinary life. A young private wrote to his mother, his words tracing the memory of the apple orchard behind their house, asking her to save a jar of her preserves for his return. Another wrote to his little brother, offering gentle, brotherly advice about looking after the family dog and working hard at his studies. These simple sentences were incredibly precious. They were a way of reminding themselves that they were still sons, brothers, and sweethearts, still bound to a world of kindness and warmth that existed far beyond the steel walls that encased them. Among the men, small and beautiful acts of quiet heroism began to unfold in the shadows. There was a young sergeant, known throughout the voyage for his stern voice and demanding standards, who now moved softly from bunk to bunk. He did not speak of discipline or the coming dawn. Instead, he gently checked the straps on a homesick private's pack, adjusted a blanket over the shoulders of a sleeping boy, and shared a piece of peppermint saved from his own belongings. In the dark, he spoke in a low, soothing murmur, telling quiet stories of his own first time away from home, reassuring the anxious minds around him with the steady, calm presence of an older brother. This was the true armor of the Marines, not the steel of their helmets or the iron hulls of their ships, but the fragile, enduring fabric of their care for one another. On the island of Betio, the defenders were watching that same steel horizon slowly solidify in the darkness. Through the gaps in their coconut log bunkers, they could see the dark shapes of the ships blotting out the familiar stars near the water's edge. A heavy, absolute silence hung over the island, broken only by the soft, rhythmic sigh of the surf against the outer reef. The Japanese soldiers, too, were wrapped in their own quiet thoughts, their hands gently touching the small personal keepsakes they kept hidden in their pockets. They felt the immense distance of their homeland like a physical ache in their chests, yet they stood shoulder to shoulder in the dark, finding a somber comfort in the shared breath of their comrades. They were two vast groups of young men, separated by a thin strip of dark water, both looking out at the same steel horizon, both clinging to the memories of a peaceful world that felt increasingly like a beautiful dream. As the ships moved closer, slipping through the black water with a ghostly, effortless grace, the sense of mystery surrounding their journey grew deeper. Every man on board knew that they were part of a grand, hidden design, a massive chapter in a global story where so much remained cloaked in secrecy. It is fascinating to realize how many forgotten pieces of our history are hidden just beneath the surface of the grand tales we are told. While thousands of brave souls were waiting on the decks of those ships, looking out at the steel horizon, there were other hidden heroes in the shadows of World War II, fighting quiet, secret battles that the world would not learn about for decades. If you find yourself captivated by these forgotten corners of our past and want to explore the hidden stories of the conflict, I have a beautiful resource for you. I've put together a completely free ebook called The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II, which you can receive by joining my quiet weekly email newsletter. It is a gentle, deeply researched journey into the world of espionage, hidden heroes, and the silent decisions that changed the course of our world from the shadows. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a wonderful way to deepen your connection to history as you relax tonight, letting the secret bravery of the past carry you gently into a restful sleep. The final hour before the sky began to turn from black to a deep, dark blue was perhaps the stillest hour of all. On the open decks of the transports, the Marines stood in long, silent rows, their faces pale in the starlight. The wind blew cool and fresh across the water, carrying the faint, sweet scent of tropical vegetation from the unseen island ahead. No one spoke. The silence was so profound that you could hear the soft creak of the leather webbing on the packs, the faint clinking of a canteen against a belt, and the steady, rhythmic wash of the waves against the side of the hull. In that immense stillness, a sense of profound reverence settled over the armada. The young men looked out at the dark shapes of the battleships, standing like ancient stone monuments against the night sky, and they found a quiet strength in the sheer scale of the community they belonged to. They were not alone. They were part of a vast, collective human heartbeat, a gathering of souls who had chosen to step forward into the dark together. As the first, fragile line of silver began to bleed into the eastern sky, marking the end of the night and the beginning of the great trial, they took one more deep breath of the cool night air, closed their eyes for a brief moment of quiet prayer, and watched as the steel horizon slowly began to wake. There is a fragile moment, just before the dawn breaks, when the entire world seems to hold its breath, suspended between the deepest peace and an unfolding, unknown future. On this specific morning, the darkness over the Pacific was profound, a vast, velvety canvas untouched by the light. The long, rhythmic swells of the ocean moved with a hypnotic, liquid grace, cradling thousands of young men who were silently preparing themselves for the sunrise. In the crowded bellies of the transport ships, the air was heavy, warm, and thick with the quiet scent of diesel oil, canvas, and the sharp, salt tang of the sea. There was very little sound. Occasionally, the soft clink of metal against metal echoed in the passageways, or the low, hushed murmur of two friends sharing a final, whispered confidence, but mostly, there was a collective, reverent stillness. Men who had been boisterous just days before were now introspective, their eyes looking far beyond the steel bulkheads that surrounded them, drifting back to the green fields, the familiar city streets, and the quiet front porches of home. These young Marines were not thinking about global strategies or historical turning points. Instead, they were anchored to the small, precious details of the lives they were protecting. In the dim, red glow of the night lights, one young private, perhaps barely old enough to shave, carefully tucked a lock of hair from his sweetheart into his pocket Bible. He traced the familiar ink on her last letter, the words a gentle balm against the rising dread in his chest, silently promising her that he would return by the autumn, just as the leaves were turning gold. In that crowded, humid space, his entire universe was concentrated in that tiny piece of paper and the gentle memory of her smile. Another man, an older, weathered sergeant, moved softly among his squad, checking straps, adjusting a helmet, his hands steady and reassuring. He didn't speak of heroism, he simply spoke in a low, calming whisper about focusing on the next step, about looking out for one another, about the importance of just keeping your head down. His presence was a source of immense comfort, a quiet pillar of human strength amidst the overwhelming machinery of war. Across the dark water, on the tiny island of Betio, the defenders were wrapped in their own silence. Inside the suffocating darkness of the coconut log bunkers, the Japanese soldiers sat shoulder to shoulder, their hands gently resting near the small personal artifacts they carried, a mother's silk handkerchief, a worn photograph, a small, polished stone from a peaceful riverbed back home. The heavy scent of crushed coral sand and the humid tropical air filled their lungs. They, too, were not thinking about grand empires. Their minds were thousands of miles away, walking through simple rice paddies or watching a cherry blossom petal dance on the breeze. They felt the overwhelming isolation of their situation, cut off from everything they loved by an infinite stretch of blue ocean, yet they found a somber comfort in the shared breath and the familiar touch of the friends standing next to them. In that terrifying darkness, they were unified by their human need for connection, holding onto the silent promise of shared endurance. And then, the quiet of the Pacific night was utterly shattered. With a sound that was felt in the deepest recesses of the body, the great naval guns of the Armada tore the air. It was not a sudden burst of anger, but a heavy, rolling thunder that seemed to physically alter the world, vibrating through the very water. From the decks of the ships, the horizon ignited in brilliant flashes of orange, crimson, and pale yellow, casting a strange, shimmering light across the dark swells. The majestic, terrifying grace of the massive shells tracing through the sky was a hypnotic spectacle, a dance of energy and light that held the young observers on the transport decks completely transfixed. For many, it was their first realization of the sheer, overwhelming power of the world they had entered. The profound quiet of just moments before now felt like a distant memory, a peaceful dream they were rapidly waking from, as the white coral island of Betio disappeared behind a swirling, apocalyptic cloud of gray smoke and dust. In the midst of this overwhelming, technological storm, individual human experiences were concentrated into the smallest, most intense moments of resilience and care. Deep within a dark, unstable bunker, a young Japanese soldier, his eyes stung by dust, instinctively reached out to hold the shaking hand of his friend, finding strength not in his weapon, but in that fragile human touch. They could not hear each other over the unrelenting thunder, but the firm pressure of their hands spoke of a universal truth: you are not alone. And aboard a crowded landing craft, bouncing violently on the troubled waves, a medic named Samuel, clutching his kit, ignored the thunder and focused solely on the pale face of the private next to him, gently patting his shoulder and offering a reassuring, calm nod. In that terrifying moment, Samuel wasn't a medical professional, he was a friend, a steady source of humanity in a world that felt like it was breaking apart. Trying to capture these profound human stories, the deep emotional weight that exists beneath the grand movements of history, is the central heart of all we do. It is in the raw, authentic visual details, the expression in a soldier's eyes, the weary posture of a comrade, or the stark, unforgiving landscape of the battlefield, that the true, deep story of Tarawa is told. While our journey tonight is a soothing, comforting exploration designed for your rest, it is important to remember that there are other aspects of this history that are difficult to process, yet deeply important to acknowledge. For those of you who feel a deep, trusting connection to this history and seek an unfiltered look at the raw human experience on that remote atoll, I have curated a powerful collection of raw, uncensored archival media. This special collection, available on Gumroad, offers a respectful but direct glimpse into the harsh realities of the battlefield that standard platforms simply cannot show. It is an opportunity to see the true face of human resilience in its purest form, honoring the sacrifice of all those who were there. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. This collection is for those ready to honor the full, unfiltered truth of their memory. As the sun began to lift over the distant, blue curve of the earth, its gentle, gold light pierced the great wall of gray smoke and dust, revealing a transformed landscape. Betio, the once peaceful speck of coral paradise, was now a fractured, shattered dream, a place where coconut palms stood like broken matchsticks and the white sand was lost beneath the evidence of the storm. The long naval bombardment began to slowly lift, transitioning into a deeper, slower rhythm, and in that brief, new silence, a collective gasp felt like it rippled through the waiting landing craft. The first great wave of the trial had passed, and the island stood exposed, battered but defiant. The young men on both sides took one final, deep breath, their hearts beating in the vast, unsettling quiet that now settled over the lagoon, waiting for the gentle current of destiny to pull them toward the shoreline. The water of the lagoon was a brilliant, deceptive turquoise, a shimmering glass mirror that hid a world of ancient stone just inches beneath the gentle rolling of the waves. For hours, the small wooden landing craft had been bobbing through the open sea, their diesel engines humming a low, monotonous lullaby that vibrated through the steel-toed boots of the young Marines packed tightly inside. The morning sun was climbing higher now, casting a sharp, glittering light across the water, making it difficult to see where the sea ended and the white sand of the island began. To the young men pressed shoulder to shoulder, the world had shrunk to the high wooden sides of their boats, the spray of salt water that periodically cooled their sunburned faces, and the steady, heavy rhythm of their own breathing. They were so close now that they could smell the sharp, metallic tang of gunpowder in the air, mixed with the sweet, heavy scent of shattered coconut trees drifting out from the shoreline. But then, with a dull, scraping shudder that vibrated through the hull of every boat, the forward momentum began to die away. One by one, the Higgins boats ground to a sudden, unexpected halt. Beneath the beautiful, clear blue water lay a vast, unyielding barrier of coral, a treacherous reef that the shifting tides had left dangerously shallow. The boats could go no further. The ramps could not drop onto the sand. Instead, they opened up into a wide, open expanse of water, hundreds of yards away from the shore. In that single, breathtaking moment, the grand plans of generals and the heavy machinery of the fleet fell completely silent, leaving the survival of thousands of young men to rely entirely on the quiet, independent strength of their own legs and the fierce resilience of their spirits. As the young Marines stepped over the sides of the boats, they dropped into water that came up to their chests, their shoulders, and sometimes over their heads. The weight of their heavy packs, soaked instantly by the sea, pulled at them like leaden hands. The white coral sand beneath their boots was uneven, filled with sudden drop-offs and sharp edges that cut through their canvas leggings. Under a sky that was rapidly filling with the dark, jagged lines of defensive fire, these boys had to begin a long, slow, agonizing walk through the sea. It was a journey measured not in miles, but in single, painful steps, where the water dragged at their limbs and the open sky offered absolutely no shelter from the storm. In this vast expanse of exposed water, the true depth of human devotion revealed itself in quiet, unforgettable moments. A tall, quiet private from Ohio saw a smaller boy from his squad lose his footing in a deep coral pothole, slipping beneath the churning water under the weight of his radio equipment. Without a moment's hesitation, ignoring the chaos around him, the private reached down, locked his fingers into the boy's pack, and hoisted him back into the air with a steady, reassuring strength. They stood there for a brief second, the water lapping at their chins, their eyes locked in a silent understanding that required no words. "I've got you," the private's steady gaze seemed to say. They moved forward together, side by side, their shared grip on each other's gear the only anchor they had in a world that felt entirely unmoored. This was not a time of grand, sweeping movements, but of small, isolated islands of humanity. Every few yards, a wounded Marine would find a temporary sanctuary behind a rusted, abandoned vehicle or a jagged outcrop of coral reef. And in those lonely spaces, friends became protectors, and strangers became brothers. Men who had never spoken more than a few words to each other on the voyage over now lay pressed against the rough stone, holding each other's hands, sharing their last drops of fresh water from dented canteens, and whispering words of quiet encouragement. They spoke softly of their mothers, of their homes, of the simple, beautiful assumption that they would make it through this day together. These gentle, whispered promises, spoken amidst the crashing of the surf, were the real victories on the reef. The moments where the warmth of human kindness completely refused to be extinguished by the cold realities of war. Exploring these deep, intimate connections, the hidden thoughts and private acts of bravery that took place out on that shallow coral barrier, requires a space where we can slow down and truly listen to the whispers of the past. The history of Tarawa is so much larger than what can be captured in a single evening, and finding a community of like-minded souls who share a reverence for these human stories is a rare and beautiful thing. If you feel a deep connection to this journey and wish to wander further into the quiet corners of our shared history, I invite you to join our family on Patreon. There, we gather to explore deep dive discussions, exclusive, uninterrupted ad-free podcasts, and extended narratives crafted specifically to help you find peace and understanding in the late hours of the night. It is a warm, welcoming space where history lovers connect on a truly human level. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Joining us there is a beautiful way to support the ongoing creation of these soothing bedtime documentaries, ensuring that these fragile memories continue to be told with the care they deserve. Out on the reef, the long morning began to bleed into the afternoon, and the water around the waiting men turned a deep, somber amber under the glare of the tropical sun. The physical exhaustion was overwhelming. Every step through the thick water felt like lifting mountains, and the salty spray burned their eyes and cracked their lips. Yet, the line of men did not break. They moved with a slow, hypnotic persistence, drawing strength from the simple sight of the back of the man walking in front of them. If he could take another step, then so could they. It was a collective, silent covenant, a quiet understanding that they would carry each other across the distance, no matter how long the reef turned out to be. When the first small groups finally reached the narrow, bloodied strip of sand at the base of the island's low seawall, they did not look back with a sense of triumph. They simply dropped onto the dry coral, their breath coming in long, ragged gasps, their bodies trembling with a deep, systemic fatigue. They looked out at the beautiful, cruel lagoon they had just crossed, where the empty landing craft still rocked gently on the incoming tide, and they felt a profound, quiet reverence for the sheer distance they had traveled. The treacherous reef had taken its toll, testing the absolute limits of their physical and emotional endurance, but as they lay pressed against the earth of Betio, listening to the soft wash of the waves against the shore, they knew they had survived the crossing, bound together by a shared baptism of water and sand that would link their souls for the rest of their days. The narrow strip of sand where the ocean met the land was a place of stark contrasts, where the blinding white of crushed coral became the resting place for the deepest, most fragile human hopes. To stand on the edge of Red Beach in those long, chaotic hours was to feel entirely stripped of the illusions of the modern world. The shoreline was a slender ribbon, barely a few feet wide, bordered on one side by the vast, indifferent turquoise of the lagoon and on the other by a low, rugged wall constructed of heavy coconut logs. This wall, stained with salt and scarred by the conflict, became the entire universe for hundreds of young Marines. Pressed tightly against its rough wood, they could feel the vibrations of the earth beneath them, a steady, unsettling shudder that matched the rapid, fearful beating of their own hearts. The air was a thick, heavy haze of white coral dust, bitter smoke, and the unrelenting tropical heat that made every breath feel like drawing fire into the lungs. Yet, in this small, crowded space, where the boundary between life and passing was as thin as a single log, the true essence of human kindness did not fade, it grew brighter, like a solitary candle burning in a deep, velvet night. Men who had been trembling in isolation just moments before found their focus shifting away from their own private fears and toward the safety of the person lying next to them. In the shelter of a slight curve in the seawall, a young corporal from the Midwest discovered a private who had lost his helmet in the deep water of the reef. The boy was shivering despite the fierce heat, his eyes wide with a quiet, overwhelming shock. Without a single word, the corporal unbuckled his own helmet, placed it gently onto the boy's head, and offered a soft, tired smile that carried the warmth of an older brother's reassurance. It was a simple gesture, an everyday act of quiet heroism that spoke of a love far deeper than any doctrine of war. As the afternoon dragged on, the narrow beach became a sanctuary for the wounded and the weary, a place where the ordinary roles of life were rewritten by the shared need for survival. Medics moved through the white dust with a slow, hypnotic grace, their hands steady and calm as they tended to those who could go no further. They spoke in low, soothing tones, their voices sounding like a gentle lullaby amidst the distant rumblings of the island. They did not talk of strategies or progress. Instead, they whispered about home, about the soft blankets waiting for them on the hospital ships, and about the letters that would soon be sent to families across the ocean. A wounded boy, holding tightly to a medic's sleeve, asked simply for a sip of water. The medic, knowing his own canteen was nearly empty, did not hesitate. He poured the last remaining drops onto the boy's dry lips, watching with a quiet, peaceful satisfaction as the tension left the young soldier's face. These profound moments of devotion, where young men gave everything they had left to offer comfort to a friend, are the quiet threads that bind our history together. To trace these individual stories through the fading archives, to find the names of those who shared their last drops of water or offered a reassuring word in the white dust, requires a deep, patient commitment to research. It takes countless hours of quiet work late into the night to ensure that these fragile human memories are not swallowed by the vastness of time. If you feel a sense of peace listening to these gentle retellings, and if you wish to support the massive research and time it takes to carefully craft these stories for your rest, I invite you to consider offering a small tip on Ko-Fi. Even a gift as simple as $1 helps sustain this quiet sanctuary of remembrance, keeping the memory of these gentle souls alive. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Your kindness allows us to keep wandering through these historical twilight journeys together, honoring the past with the care it truly deserves. Along the length of the beach, a quiet resilience began to take root in the white coral sand. The Marines did not look forward with anger, nor did they look back toward the ships with regret. They simply focused on the small patch of earth they occupied, drawing strength from the collective silence of their comrades. When the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting long, elegant shadows across the lagoon, a strange, expectant hush fell over the shoreline. The white coral began to glow with a soft, pink hue in the twilight, reflecting the brilliant colors of the tropical sky. It was a moment of surreal beauty, an elegant reminder that the natural world remained calm and serene, completely untouched by the temporary struggles of man. In those twilight hours, as the heat of the day began to lift and a cool evening breeze drifted in from the sea, the young men on Red Beach took their first deep breaths in hours. They looked at each other through the fading light, their faces covered in white dust and dark grime, and they recognized the profound bond that now connected them. They were no longer just a collection of individuals from different towns and backgrounds. They were a singular, enduring family, carved out of the white coral and the shared experience of the shoreline. They adjusted their packs, shared a few quiet words of comfort, and prepared themselves for the long night ahead, knowing that whatever the darkness might bring, they would face it together, sheltered by the seawall and the unyielding strength of each other's presence. Beneath the weight of the shattered island, sheltered by heavy coconut logs and deep banks of fine white sand, a different kind of quiet settled into the hearts of those who waited in the dark. To step inside the subterranean labyrinth of the island's defenses was to leave the blinding tropical sun behind and enter a world of shadows, stifling heat, and absolute isolation. The walls, built with painstaking care over many long months from the fibrous trunks of palm trees, smelled heavily of sap, damp earth, and the sharp, bitter tang of cordite drifting down from the surface. In this claustrophobic stillness, the outside world seemed to fade into a distant rumor. The grand movements of ships and fleets, the high-level strategies of empires, and the sweeping tides of history did not matter here. Within these thick, earthen walls, the universe had shrunk to the size of a single bunker, illuminated only by the faint, golden flicker of a single oil lamp or the thin, dancing beams of starlight filtering through the narrow viewing slits. For the young Japanese defenders inside, this underground world was a space of intense, internal reflection. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their backs against the rough, cooling wood of the logs, listening to the low, rhythmic thrum of the ocean waves breaking against the outer reef. Many of them were far from home, young men who had spent their childhoods among the mist-covered hills of Honshu or in the quiet, historic alleys of Kyoto. In the heavy silence between the thundering concussions of naval shells, they shared hushed, whispered conversations, their voices sounding soft and gentle, like a nighttime prayer. They did not speak of conquest or glory. Instead, they spoke of their families, their mothers' cooking, and the familiar, reassuring routines of the lives they had left behind on the other side of the infinite blue ocean. In these dark spaces, small and profoundly human acts of kindness unfolded in the quiet hours. A young soldier, noticing that his companion was shivering from sheer exhaustion and the psychological weight of the isolation, gently reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, treasured possession, a beautifully folded origami crane, crafted from a scrap of colored paper sent to him in a letter months ago. He placed it silently into his friend's palm, his eyes offering a calm, steady reassurance that transcended the terrifying reality surrounding them. In another corner of the bunker, a wounded soldier was tenderly cared for by his comrade, who used his own clean undershirt to bind a wound, speaking all the while in a low, soothing murmur about the cool mountain breezes of home, helping to drift his mind away from the heavy, suffocating heat of the underground shelter. These men knew, with a quiet and somber certainty, that their position was entirely cut off, yet they chose to meet the unknown not with panic, but with a collective, dignified resilience. They found a deep, comforting strength in the simple presence of one another, recognizing that their shared humanity was the ultimate shield against despair. They shared their remaining water, a few drops at a time from dented metal flasks, and passed around small, worn photographs of their families, letting each man look upon the smiling faces of children and wives, finding a momentary sanctuary in the universal warmth of love and remembrance. These whispers in the bunker were the true essence of their endurance, a soft, unbreakable network of human souls holding onto each other in the deep darkness of the earth. Reflecting upon these deeply intimate chapters of our past, realizing that even within the hidden, underground shelters of the Pacific, the human heart continued to love, to fear, and to care for its fellow man, is a beautiful way to foster a true understanding of our shared history. It reminds us that beneath the grand, sweeping narratives of conflict, there are thousands of fragile, personal stories waiting to be remembered. If you find yourself drawn to these poignant moments of human resilience and wish to bring a physical piece of this historical journey into your own quiet space, you can discover a wonderful selection of World War II memorabilia, or perhaps watch the deeply moving, visual history of the Pacific Theater in the movie Midway on Prime by visiting Amazon. Immersing yourself in these historical artifacts and films is a gentle, thoughtful way to honor the memory of all those who lived through these trials as you unwind for the night. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a peaceful way to connect with the past from the comfort of your room, allowing the quiet courage of those distant generations to guide you into a restful sleep. As the long night began to stretch over the atoll, the air inside the bunkers grew cooler, carrying the faint, sweet scent of the ocean breeze through the small air vents. The defenders lay back against the sand, their breathing falling into a slow, synchronized rhythm that matched the gentle sigh of the tide outside. They looked up at the heavy coconut logs above them, realizing that those very trees had once provided shade and life to the island, and now, in their altered form, they offered a final, protective embrace. There was no hatred remaining in the quiet darkness of the shelter, no anger burning in the tropical night. There was only a profound, universal stillness, a collective acceptance of the moment. Outside, the stars continued their slow, magnificent march across the velvet sky, casting a soft, silver light over the scarred landscape of Betio. Inside the bunkers, the whispers gradually faded into a reverent silence as the young men finally closed their eyes, letting their minds drift away from the island entirely. They dreamed of green fields, of peaceful rivers, and of the warm, welcoming arms of the people they loved, finding a timeless, beautiful sanctuary within their own memories, completely safe and undisturbed within the gentle, gathering shadows of the earth. When the sun finally sank below the edge of the western sea, it pulled away its golden light to reveal a night so vast, dark, and heavy that the island of Betio seemed to dissolve entirely into the black velvet of the Pacific. The tropical twilight faded with a quiet, lingering sigh, leaving behind an absolute and profound darkness. Along the narrow, white coral shoreline, hundreds of young Marines lay pressed against the rough wood of the coconut log seawall, their bodies completely exhausted by the trials of the day. The fierce, unrelenting heat of the sun was slowly replaced by a cool, salt-tinged breeze that drifted in from the lagoon, bringing a gentle, momentary relief to sun-baked skin. In this pitch-black landscape, the world became a tapestry of sound rather than sight. There was the soft, rhythmic lapping of the water against the sand, the occasional, distant rustle of a broken palm frond, and the deep, synchronized chorus of thousands of men, breathing softly in the dark, waiting for an uncertain dawn. For these young men, this was the longest night of their lives, a timeless stretch of hours where the mind, stripped of the distractions of daylight, wandered back to the simple sanctuaries of the past. A private from the rolling hills of Kentucky lay on his back, his fingers tracing the cold steel of his rifle, while his thoughts walked down a dusty lane toward his childhood home. In the theater of his mind, he could see the soft amber light glowing through the kitchen window, hear the gentle murmur of his parents' voices at the dinner table, and feel the comforting weight of his old blanket. He clung to these memories with a quiet, fierce intensity, using the warmth of home as a shield against the heavy dread that tried to settle in his chest. Across the dark sand, another young man, barely 19, silently recited the words of a poem his grandmother had taught him, the rhythmic syllables acting as a soothing lullaby to quiet the trembling in his hands. In this deep, intimidating shadows, small and beautiful acts of quiet heroism flourished like night-blooming flowers. There was no room for grand gestures in the dark, only small, unseen movements of pure human love. A seasoned corporal, hearing the shallow, nervous breathing of a homesick recruit lying a few feet away, slowly reached out through the darkness until his hand found the boy's shoulder. He did not speak of tactics or duties. Instead, he simply left his hand there, a steady, warm, and grounding presence in the blackness. The firm pressure of his hand conveyed a message far deeper than any words could manage. I am here. You are not alone. We will see the morning together. In that single touch, the terrifying isolation of the Pacific night was broken, anchored by the simple, beautiful reality of human companionship. Further down the beach, in a shallow trench scooped out of the white sand, a young medic moved softly on his knees, guided entirely by touch and the faint, pale light of the stars. He carried no weapons, only a small canvas bag of bandages and a heart full of boundless empathy. He spent his night checking on the wounded, his voice a low, comforting whisper that fell over the suffering men like a gentle blanket. He dried their damp foreheads with a scrap of clean cloth, held their hands when the darkness felt too heavy, and spoke to them about the clean white sheets and the quiet rest that awaited them on the hospital ships out in the deep water. He was a keeper of hope in the dark, a soft light burning brightly in a world that had temporarily lost its way. On the other side of the logs, trapped within the claustrophobic darkness of their underground bunkers, the Japanese defenders were experiencing their own version of this endless night. They sat in the heavy, humid heat, listening to the very same ocean waves that lapped against the shoreline. They, too, were looking inward, looking backward across the great blue expanse of the ocean to the peaceful villages and the loved ones they had left behind. In those quiet hours, the artificial divisions of uniform and language seemed to drift away, leaving only a collective human exhaustion. Both sides were composed of young men, suspended in the same midnight stillness, both praying to the same stars for protection, and both holding tightly to the memory of a peaceful world that felt increasingly like a beautiful, distant dream. The sheer depth of these human stories, the quiet bravery of men who reached out to comfort a stranger in the pitch black of a remote atoll, reminds us of how much of our history is built upon silent, hidden moments of devotion. It is fascinating to realize how many chapters of our past remain cloaked in secrecy, hidden away in the deep shadows of time. Just as these young men fought a quiet battle of endurance on the beaches of Tarawa, there were other hidden heroes during World War II, operating in the deep twilight of espionage and secret operations, changing the course of history without ever making a sound. If you find yourself captivated by these forgotten corners of our past and want to discover the secret histories that shaped our world, I have a beautiful resource for you. I have put together a completely free ebook titled The Shadow War, 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II, which you can receive as a gift by joining my quiet weekly email newsletter. It is a gentle, deeply researched exploration into the world of hidden operations and the silent choices that altered the destiny of generations. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a thoughtful way to deepen your love for history from the comfort of your room, letting the quiet courage of the past carry you gently toward a peaceful rest. As the night drifted into its final, deepest hours, the time just before the first light of dawn begins to paint the eastern sky, a strange, absolute hush fell over the entire island of Betio. The gentle trade wind seemed to quiet their rustling through the broken palms, and the ocean became as smooth and reflective as black glass, holding the stars within its waters. The men on the beach, exhausted by the weight of their thoughts and the heavy burden of vigilance, allowed their eyelids to grow heavy. Many fell into a light, restful sleep, their breathing falling into a synchronized rhythm with the steady, soothing wash of the tide. In that beautiful, fragile silence, the wounds of the day were momentarily covered by the great, healing mantle of the night. There was no anger left in the darkness, no noise to shatter the peace. There was only a vast, universal stillness that wrapped itself around every soul on the island. As the first pale ribbon of silver began to trace itself along the dark horizon, marking the end of the longest night, the young men opened their eyes to welcome the dawn, taking one more deep, collective breath of the cool morning air, comforted by the knowledge that they had survived the darkness together, shoulder to shoulder, on the white coral sand. The low barrier of coconut logs had stood for days as a line drawn between two worlds, but there comes a moment when the human spirit decides that it can no longer be held back by the constraints of wood and stone. The morning sun rose over the atoll with a brilliant, blinding intensity, casting a golden light across the white coral dust that still hung thick in the warm tropical air. For the young Marines who had spent hours pressed against the rough, salt-crusted timber of the seawall, the world was about to change its shape. They had lived in the shadow of that wall, finding a fragile sanctuary along its narrow base, but they knew that survival lay in moving forward, and stepping over the barrier and into the unknown interior of the island. The sand beneath their boots was hot and dry, and every movement required an immense, conscious effort of will, overcoming a profound physical and emotional exhaustion that had settled deep within their bones. As they looked up at the top of the logs, the distance seemed mountainously high, yet the air was filled with a quiet, collective determination. This was not a moment of sudden, dramatic rushes, but a slow, deliberate gathering of human courage. A young private from the flat farmland of Indiana, whose hands had been trembling only the night before, looked at the boy next to him, a close friend from training camp whose eyes were wide with a silent, paralyzing fear. Without a word, the private reached out, gently squeezing his friend's shoulder, and offered a soft, whispered reassurance that carried the familiar warmth of home. He went first, placing a heavy boot onto a notch in the wood, lifting himself up with a steady, quiet grace that inspired everyone around him. It was a small act of everyday heroism, an understated decision to be brave so that someone else might find the strength to follow. Step by painful step, individual groups of men began to break through the barrier, moving onto the scarred terrain of Betio. Among them were the quiet engineers, carrying heavy tools and packs, whose task was to clear a path through the labyrinth of bunkers and tangled wire. They worked with a patient, rhythmic focus, entirely absorbed in the immediate demands of their hands. They did not look at the wider landscape of the battle. They focused on a single log, a single wire, or a single pocket of sand, clearing the way for their comrades with a tireless, uncomplaining dedication. In the midst of this overwhelming effort, small, profound moments of humanity continued to blossom in the dust. An engineer, finding a wounded comrade lying in the open heat, stopped his work entirely to drag the man into the partial shade of a broken palm tree, gently wiping the sweat from the soldier's eyes and whispering that everything was going to be all right before returning to his labor. This slow, agonizing push inland was a testament to pure human endurance, a reality where every foot of ground gained was paid for with the immense currency of human fatigue and quiet sacrifice. The landscape was unforgiving, a world of shattered trees, hot coral sand, and deep underground shelters where the defenders remained hidden from view. To truly understand what it felt like to stand on that hot sand, to look over the edge of that wooden wall and see the stark, unvarnished truth of the battlefield, is an experience that words alone can sometimes struggle to capture. History is not just a collection of peaceful thoughts. It contains raw, heavy realities that demand to be remembered with absolute honesty and respect. For those of you who feel a deep, trusting bond with this journey and wish to see the uncensored truth of what these brave souls faced beyond the seawall, I have made a special resource available. On Gumroad, you can find a curated digital collection of raw, unseen archival media, restricted photographs, and historical footage that capture the true, harsh realities of the Tarawa campaign in a way standard platforms cannot show. It is a profound, unfiltered window into the raw human experience of the war, offered as a quiet tribute to the memory of all who were there. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a deeply meaningful way to honor the full truth of their resilience as you reflect on their journey tonight. As the afternoon began to lean toward the evening, the character of the island changed once more. The long, heavy shadow of the seawall stretched backward toward the sea, a silent monument to the barrier that had finally been broken. The Marines had established a fragile, hard-won foothold in the interior, their lines stretching through the white sand and the ruined groves of palms. They were completely spent, their uniforms covered in fine coral dust and gray soot, their lips cracked by the relentless tropical sun, yet as they looked back at the logs they had climbed over, a deep, somber sense of accomplishment settled over them. In the twilight, a cool breeze drifted inland from the lagoon, carrying away the bitter scent of smoke and bringing a gentle, healing stillness to the landscape. The young men lay down in their newly dug shallow trenches, their breathing slow and heavy as they watched the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. They had broken the seawall not with hatred or fury, but with a steady, unbreakable network of companionship and quiet resilience. Wrapped in the protective mantle of the evening, they closed their eyes and let their minds drift away from the island, finding a timeless, peaceful sanctuary within the memories of home, completely safe and at rest in the quiet, gathering shadows of the Pacific night. The longest journeys always end in a heavy, breathless quiet, as though the earth itself must take a slow, deep breath after a great storm has finally passed. Over the tiny island of Betio, the heat of the third long day began to soften, yielding at last to the long, elegant shadows of a fading tropical sun. The atmosphere was thick with white coral dust, drifting like a low winter mist through the shattered groves of coconut palms. For the young men on both sides of this narrow strip of land, the physical and emotional exhaustion had reached a point where the world felt entirely surreal, moving in a slow, dreamlike state. The grand, roaring noises of the previous days had begun to fracture into isolated pockets of stillness, leaving behind a profound, collective weariness that hung over the sandbags and log bunkers like a heavy velvet blanket. In the easternmost corners of the island, the remaining Japanese defenders found themselves gathered in the deepest shadows of their underground shelters. They were completely cut off from the rest of the world, their communication lines broken, their supplies of fresh water dwindled down to a few precious drops at the bottom of dented metal flasks. Yet, in these final hours, panic did not rule the dark. Instead, a deeply moving, serene dignity settled over the young men. A soldier from a small fishing village on the coast of Japan spent his final moments carefully smoothing out a wrinkled letter from his sister, tracing the elegant ink characters with a trembling finger, letting his mind escape the suffocating air of the bunker to wander along the cool, mist-covered shores of his childhood. His comrade sat quietly beside him, sharing a silent nod, an unspoken agreement to look after one another until the very end. They found their strength not in their weapons, but in the gentle, familiar rhythm of their shared breathing, holding on to their humanity in a world that had tilted entirely into darkness. As the twilight deepened into a dark, star-filled night, the final, desperate movements of the conflict began to unfold under the watchful eyes of the Pacific sky. It was a tragic, somber finale, where the remaining defenders stepped out into the open air, their voices rising in a final, collective cry that echoed across the quiet lagoon. It was not a sound of hatred, but the raw, unfiltered expression of human souls facing their destiny together. On the other side of the white sand, the American Marines listened to that distant, haunting sound from the depths of their shallow trenches. They did not feel a sense of anger or malice. Instead, a deep, sorrowful reverence settled into their hearts. They recognized that the young men crying out in the dark were just like them, sons, brothers, and dreamers who loved their homes, caught up in the immense, unyielding machinery of a global storm. In the midst of this heavy night, small and beautiful acts of mercy took place in the shadows, far away from the grand narrative of victory. A young Marine medic, hearing a soft, rhythmic moaning from a ruined bunker, crawled through the white dust without a weapon in his hand. Guided only by the pale light of the stars, he found a young Japanese soldier who was severely wounded and shivering from shock. The medic did not see an enemy, he saw a boy, barely old enough to be away from home. Gently, with a tenderness that defied the cruel environment, the medic pressed a damp cloth to the boy's forehead, offered him a sip of cool water from his own canteen, and held his hand in the dark, whispering soft, comforting words in English that the boy could not understand, but whose soothing, peaceful tone required no translation. In that fragile moment, the artificial barriers of war completely dissolved, replaced by a pure, luminous spark of human love. To truly sit with these profound chapters of our past, to listen to the quiet whispers of those who lived through the final hours of the atoll, is a deeply moving experience that changes the way we look at history. It reminds us that beneath every grand battle on a map, there is a vast ocean of personal feelings, private fears, and quiet resilience that standard retellings often overlook. If you feel a deep, trusting connection to these human stories and wish to journey further into the quiet, untold corners of our shared past, I invite you to join our gentle community on Patreon. There, we gather late at night to explore deep-dive historical narratives, free ad-free podcasts, and extended, soothing stories crafted specifically to help you find a sense of peace and rest. It is a warm, welcoming space for history lovers who wish to honor the past on a truly human level. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Joining us there is a beautiful way to support the creation of these nightly documentaries, ensuring that the memory of these fragile souls is preserved with absolute care. As the final cries of the atoll slowly faded into the immense, dark expanse of the ocean, an absolute and unprecedented silence returned to the island of Betio. The gentle trade winds began to blow once more, rustling softly through the fractured palm fronds, carrying away the bitter scent of smoke and replacing it with the clean, sharp tang of the salt sea. The survivors on the beach lay back against the hot sand, their bodies trembling with a deep, systemic fatigue, their minds completely spent. They looked out at the beautiful, calm waters of the lagoon, where the long waves broke against the outer reef in a steady, hypnotic lullaby, and they realized that the great struggle had finally come to an end. In the early hours of the morning, just before the first brush of silver began to touch the eastern horizon, a profound sense of relief and somber reflection settled over the entire atoll. There were no loud celebrations, no cheers of triumph in the dark. There was only a quiet, collective holding of breath, a deep reverence for the fallen, and a silent prayer for the peaceful world that lay somewhere beyond the ocean. Wrapped in the protective mantle of the night, the young men closed their eyes and let the gentle rhythm of the tides wash over their weary spirits, finding a timeless, beautiful sanctuary within their own memories, completely safe and at rest beneath the eternal Pacific stars. The long, thunderous storm had finally spent its fury, leaving the shattered island to drift back into the wide, welcoming arms of an immense and healing silence. As the sun rose on the morning after the struggle had ended, its gentle golden rays pierced through the settling dust, casting a soft, golden light across the white coral sands of Betio. The air, which had been thick for days with the bitter scent of smoke and iron, was slowly cleansed by the steady, refreshing wash of the Pacific trade winds. The ocean waves lapped against the shoreline with a rhythmic, hypnotic sigh, a timeless lullaby that seemed to whisper of peace returning to a place that had temporarily lost its way. For the young men who remained on this narrow strip of land, the sudden absence of noise was profound, a heavy, beautiful quiet that settled into their tired bones like a warm blanket after a long winter night. They moved across the landscape now with slow, hesitant steps, their bodies weighed down by an overwhelming physical and emotional exhaustion. The frantic energy of the previous days had completely vanished, replaced by a quiet, somber reverence. There were no shouts of triumph, no flags waved in celebration. Instead, a collective hush fell over the survivors as they began the solemn, deeply human task of looking after the landscape and one another. They walked among the ruined coconut groves and the fractured sea walls, their eyes softened by a deep, reflective sorrow for the immense cost of the ground beneath their boots. Every face was lined with dust and weariness, yet in their shared silence, an unbreakable bond of brotherhood was written across their features. In a quiet corner of the beach, near a rusted vehicle half submerged in the turquoise lagoon, a young clerk from a small town in Pennsylvania sat on a wooden crate, balancing a heavy ledger on his knees. His hands, stained with ink and fine coral dust, moved with a slow, gentle care as he began the heartbreaking work of sorting through the personal effects of those who would not be making the journey home. He didn't see numbers or names on an official list. He saw the tangible remnants of beautiful, vibrant lives. He handled a silver pocket watch, still ticking softly with a rhythmic beat that felt like a tiny mechanical heart, a faded photograph of a smiling mother standing on a front porch in Iowa, and a stack of unmailed letters tied together with a piece of blue ribbon. Each item was a fragile lifeline to a world of kindness and warmth, and the young clerk packed them away into small canvas bags with the same absolute tenderness a mother uses when tucking her child into bed at night. As he worked, a quiet sergeant walked over and silently placed a dented metal canteen on the crate beside him. The sergeant didn't speak, but his hand rested on the clerk's shoulder for a long, grounding moment. In that simple, everyday act of kindness, an entire language of comfort was spoken. It was a way of sharing the heavy burden of memory, of saying without words that they were in this together, and that the stories left behind in the sand would never be forgotten. These small, quiet gestures of empathy were the true victories of the day, the moments where the warmth of the human spirit completely refused to be diminished by the vast desolation of the battlefield. Ensuring that these delicate, deeply personal moments are preserved from the fading mist of time is a quiet, devoted labor of love. The history of Tarawa is not found in the grand movements of ships, but in the soft scratching of a clerk's pen, the silent comfort of a hand on a shoulder, and the fragile letters preserved in canvas bags. It takes an immense amount of patient research, sifting through old journals and quiet archives late into the night, to bring these voices back to you each evening in a way that brings comfort and rest. If you find peace in these gentle journeys, and if they help you unwind in the quiet hours of the night, please consider supporting this work with a small tip on Ko-Fi. Even a gift as simple as $1 helps sustain the massive time and care required to craft these soothing historical sanctuaries for your sleep. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Your gentle support allows us to keep wandering through these historical twilights together, keeping the memory of these beautiful souls alive for generations to come. As the afternoon began to fade into a soft, violet twilight, the physical scars of the island seemed to blend into the evening shadows. The long waves continued to wash over the outer coral reef, their steady, rhythmic breaking sounding like a soft heartbeat beneath the vast blue sky. The survivors lay down in their shelters, looking out at the calm water where the great fleet now rested quietly on the dark swells. They felt a profound, peaceful relief washing over them, an understanding that the trial was over, and that they had survived the storm by holding onto the humanity of the person standing next to them. In the deep stillness of the tropical night, the stars emerged in brilliant, silent clusters, watching over the atoll just as they had done for thousands of years. The young men closed their eyes, letting their thoughts drift away from the white sands of Betio entirely. They traveled backward across the great ocean, walking through the familiar, safe streets of their childhoods, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves in their own backyards, and feeling the comforting embrace of the people they loved. Wrapped in the great, healing mantle of the silence that had returned to the island, they finally found a deep, uninterrupted rest, completely safe and at peace beneath the eternal Pacific sky. Time possesses a gentle, healing hand, capable of smoothing away the deepest scars of the earth until even the loudest storms of the past fade into a soft and distant whisper. If you were to visit the peaceful atoll of Tarawa today, you would find it difficult to believe that its white coral sands were once the center of a world-shaking conflict. The vast, eternal Pacific has done what water always does. It has washed, cooled, and renewed the shoreline, step by gentle step, through countless rising and falling tides. The warm tropical sun glints off a lagoon of pure, clear turquoise, and the long, graceful trade winds blow steadily across the islet of Betio, rustling through the emerald leaves of new coconut palms that have grown tall over the decades. The island has returned to its ancient, slow rhythm, a tranquil sanctuary where the only regular sounds are the cry of the seabirds and the hypnotic, rhythmic sigh of the ocean breaking softly against the outer reef. Yet, history does not truly vanish, it simply changes its form, becoming a living presence carried upon the breeze. If you walk along the quiet beaches at twilight, when the sky turns a beautiful, soft shade of violet and gold, you can still feel the profound weight of the memories that rest beneath the sand. The rust on an old piece of iron half buried in the coral, or the soft silhouette of a concrete bunker now covered in beautiful green vines, are gentle reminders of the thousands of young men who once stood here, far from home, looking out at this very same horizon. These silent remnants do not speak of anger or divide. Instead, they serve as quiet monuments to a shared human experience, a profound testament to the fragility and the ultimate resilience of the human heart. The true legacy of Tarawa is carried not in the grand textbooks of strategy, but in the enduring echoes of the personal stories that unfolded in the dust and the water. It lives in the memory of the young farm boy from the American Midwest who overcame his deepest, private terrors to pull a drowning comrade from a coral pothole. It lives in the memory of the young Japanese defender who sat in the suffocating darkness of a log bunker, finding a moment of pure, beautiful serenity by folding a tiny paper crane for a frightened friend. And it lives in the memory of the dedicated medics who carried no weapons, only a boundless capacity for empathy, holding the hands of strangers in the pitch black of the tropical night and whispering comforting words of peace as they closed their eyes. These young men, who were once separated by uniform, language, and the immense distance of an ocean, are now forever unified by the quiet soil of the atoll and the timeless embrace of the sea. They were all dreamers, sons, and brothers, individuals who carried photographs of smiling families in their pockets and treasured the simple, beautiful hope of returning to a world of kindness and warmth. As the years have drifted quietly by, their individual fears and sufferings have been gathered up by the great, healing mantle of time, leaving behind a profound and universal message of peace. A gentle reminder that our shared humanity is the most precious thing we possess, a light that no storm can ever fully extinguish. Keeping these fragile, deeply moving human memories alive is a beautiful way to ensure that the sacrifices of that generation continue to guide our world toward gentleness and understanding. Holding on to a piece of this history, or immersing yourself in the visual stories of their bravery, allows us to honor their legacy from a place of deep respect and quiet reflection. If you find yourself wanting to connect more deeply with the spirit of those who journeyed across the Pacific, you can find a wonderful selection of World War II memorabilia, as well as the deeply moving, beautifully crafted film Midway on Prime, by visiting Amazon. Watching these cinematic histories or keeping a small token of remembrance in your room is a thoughtful, soothing way to keep the names and the quiet courage of those distant generations alive in your thoughts as you prepare for rest tonight. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a peaceful way to connect with the past from the comfort of your home, allowing the quiet resilience of those brave souls to wrap you in a sense of safety and calm. The night is settling deeply over the Tarawa Atoll now, bringing with it a vast, velvet darkness that mirrors the beautiful canopy of stars watching over the ocean. The trade winds continue their steady, rhythmic journey across the water, blowing softly through the palm trees and carrying the faint, poetic echoes of the past out into the infinite blue expanse. There is no noise left to break the stillness, no lingering shadows of conflict. There is only an absolute, sacred peace that blankets the white coral sand and the gentle rolling of the waves. The young men who lived this history have long since found their rest, their spirits drifting safely back to the peaceful rivers, the rolling hills, and the welcoming arms of the loved ones they left behind so many years ago. They are completely safe now, entirely at peace, protected forever by the timeless beauty of the natural world and the enduring memory of their quiet devotion. As you listen to the steady, soothing rhythm of the tide breaking against the shore, let your own eyelids grow heavy and your thoughts drift away. Take one more deep, slow breath of the cool night air, let the gentle whispers of the trade winds carry away the worries of your day, and allow yourself to fall into a deep, uninterrupted sleep, completely safe, warm, and at rest beneath the eternal, watching stars. When you step away from the open edge of the sea, the world narrows, and the sky itself seems to hold its breath in the quiet, shattered center of the island. To leave the shoreline of Betio was to leave behind the vast, open horizon of the Pacific Ocean and enter a completely different world. Beyond the low, battered sea walls lay a labyrinth of broken earth, a landscape that had been profoundly altered by the heavy hand of the preceding days. The once lush groves of towering coconut palms had been splintered and cast down, their fibrous trunks crisscrossing the white ground like fallen bridges. Between these fallen giants ran a network of deep trenches, blast craters, and dugouts that the men came to know as the sunken roads. It was a place where the horizon was measured not in miles, but in mere yards, bounded by mounds of crushed coral and the heavy, settling dust of the tropical afternoon. In this claustrophobic interior, the grand, sweeping narrative of the Pacific Campaign entirely dissolved. There were no long lines of advancing troops, no clear markers of progress, and no grand strategies that made sense in the thick, suffocating heat. Instead, the world fragmented into countless, isolated islands of human endurance. Small groups of young men, often cut off from their wider units and surrounded by an eerie, unpredictable quiet, found themselves navigating a maze of white sand and shattered timber. The air was perfectly still here, shielded from the gentle ocean breezes by the uneven terrain, and a fine, powdery dust coated every surface, turning the green uniforms of the Marines into the pale, ghostly color of the coral itself. In one of these shallow, sunken pathways, a small squad of 4 young men sought temporary refuge from the blistering sun. Among them was a quiet boy named Arthur, who had grown up surrounded by the endless, rolling wheat fields of the American Midwest. Arthur was accustomed to spaces so wide you could see the weather changing a day before it arrived. Now, his entire universe was confined to a narrow trench of hot, white earth. He sat with his back pressed firmly against the sloping dirt, his knees pulled up to his chest, trying to make himself as small as possible. The heavy pack he carried felt like an anchor, pulling him deep into the sand, but it was the profound sense of isolation that weighed the heaviest upon his heart. To cope with the overwhelming reality of the sunken roads, Arthur simply closed his eyes and let his mind travel back across the water. He pictured the wooden porch of his family farmhouse. He could almost hear the familiar, rhythmic creaking of his mother's rocking chair, and the soft, musical chime of the glass wind chimes hanging near the door. He imagined the smell of impending rain rising from the dry summer soil, a scent so deeply comforting that it caused a small, involuntary sigh to escape his cracked lips. The boy sitting next to him, a friend named Thomas from the crowded streets of a distant city, heard that sigh. Thomas did not say a word. He simply reached over, uncorked his dented metal canteen, and offered it to Arthur. The water inside was entirely warm, tasting heavily of the tin, but in that silent exchange, it was the sweetest, most profound gift in the world. It was a quiet acknowledgement that they were completely reliant upon one another, bound together by the simple, everyday heroism of sharing what little they had left. Just a few dozen yards away, separated only by a mound of shattered palm logs and a thick wall of white sand, a different group of young men huddled in the deep shadows of an underground dugout. The Japanese defenders who occupied this hidden space were experiencing the exact same suffocating heat, the exact same thirst, and the exact same human longing for peace. For a young soldier named Hiroshi, the sunken roads of Betio felt like a waking dream. He was a long way from the quiet, mist-shrouded valleys of his home, where he had spent his days as a student, reading poetry and watching the seasons change the colors of the leaves. Now, his hands were covered in the fine, white dust of the coral, and his eyes were heavy with an exhaustion that reached deep into his soul. Hiroshi sat in the dim light filtering down through the narrow opening of the bunker. In his dusty hands, he held a small, carefully folded piece of paper. It was a letter from his younger sister, written many months ago, its edges now soft and worn from being touched 1,000 times in the dark. He did not need to read the words, he had memorized every stroke of the ink. She had written about the arrival of the spring blossoms and how the family had saved a special sweet treat for his eventual return. As he ran his thumb over the fragile paper, Hiroshi felt a profound, gentle sadness wash over him. He looked around at the faces of his comrades in the dim light. They were just boys, ordinary young men who missed their mothers, who missed the taste of fresh water, and who wished for nothing more than to wake up and find that the sunken roads were only a distant, fading nightmare. The tragedy of the island was held in this invisible proximity. These two groups of young men, Arthur and Thomas in their shallow trench, Hiroshi and his friends in their shadowed dugout, were breathing the same stagnant, dusty air. They were looking up at the same sliver of bright blue sky, and they were all retreating into the same beautiful, fragile memories of home to find the strength to endure the passing hours. They were separated by a vast gulf of circumstance and uniform, yet they were entirely united by their shared suffering, their private fears, and the quiet, enduring resilience of the human heart. To truly understand the depth of what happened in those hidden, claustrophobic spaces, one must look beyond the clean, sweeping narratives of history books. The reality of the sunken roads was raw, intimate, and deeply personal. It is a history that is often shielded from view, hidden away because of its intense, unfiltered truth. Exploring these hidden corners of human endurance requires a space where we can face the past with profound respect and a clear, unwavering gaze. If you feel a deep, trusting bond with this history and wish to witness the true, unvarnished reality of what these brave souls endured, I have curated a special collection for you. On Gumroad, I offer a digital collection of raw, unseen archival media, restricted photographs, and historical footage that capture the harsh, uncensored realities of the war. These are the profound, quiet images that standard platforms simply cannot show, offering a direct, deeply moving window into the true human experience of the battlefield. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a deeply meaningful way to honor the absolute truth of their resilience as you reflect on their journey tonight. As the long, arduous afternoon gradually began to wane, the light within the sunken roads began to change. The harsh, blinding glare of the midday sun softened into a rich, golden amber. The dust that hung suspended in the still air caught this light, glowing faintly like millions of tiny, floating embers. In this beautiful, shifting light, a profound and unexpected quiet fell over the center of the island. It was as if the sheer weight of the exhaustion had finally pressed all the noise out of the world. During this brief, fragile cessation of sound, a small, remarkable thing happened near Arthur's trench. A tiny seabird, blown off course and disoriented by the altered landscape, fluttered down from the sky and landed softly on the splintered edge of a fallen coconut palm. It folded its delicate white wings and tilted its head, looking around with bright, curious eyes. The Marines in the trench simply froze, their breath catching in their throats. They watched the bird with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. For a few, fleeting moments, this tiny creature brought the entire natural world back to them. It was a reminder that life still existed, that beauty could still be found, and that the world was larger than the white coral walls that surrounded them. When the bird finally took to the air again, vanishing into the golden light, a collective, soft sigh rippled through the young men, leaving behind a lingering, gentle peace. With the fading of the light, the oppressive heat of the sunken road slowly began to lift. The white coral sand, which had baked for hours under the sun, finally began to cool, drawing the ambient warmth out of the air. The long, deep shadows cast by the broken trees stretched out and merged, turning the narrow pathways into rivers of cool, dark violet. The men on both sides of the island felt this shift in the atmosphere, and their bodies responded with an overwhelming, uncontrollable wave of fatigue. In the gathering twilight, the need for human connection grew even stronger. Men who had spent the day gripping their heavy equipment now let their hands fall away, reaching instead for the comforting presence of the friend beside them. They sat shoulder to shoulder, pooling their warmth as the evening chill began to settle into the trenches. A young corporal, his face still covered in the pale dust, quietly began to hum a slow, gentle melody from his childhood. He didn't know the words anymore, but the simple, lilting tune carried a soothing rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the beating of their tired hearts. Slowly, one by one, the men allowed their heavy eyelids to close. The sunken roads of Betio, which had been a place of intense isolation and fear during the day, were now transformed by the night into a quiet, protective cradle. The high walls of coral sand sheltered them from the cool night wind, and the deep, velvet darkness offered a temporary sanctuary from the world. Above them, the brilliant, glittering canopy of the Pacific stars began to emerge, vast and unchanging, a beautiful reminder of the eternal nature of the universe. Even here, in the very center of the shattered island, the faint, rhythmic sound of the ocean could still be heard. It was a low, steady murmur, a timeless lullaby that rolled over the broken palms and down into the sunken roads. The young men listened to the sea, letting its ancient voice wash away the lingering anxieties of the day. They let their minds untether from the coral sand, drifting away on the soft evening breeze, floating backward through time and space to the safe, quiet places they loved. They found themselves walking through familiar front doors, sitting in warm, brightly lit rooms, and resting in the gentle, protective embrace of those who loved them most. As you lie in your own quiet space, let the story of these brave, resilient souls gently guide you toward your own rest. Let the soft, golden light of the fading afternoon warm you, and let the cool, velvet shadows of the evening wrap around you like a comforting blanket. The struggles of the day are over now, and the world has grown entirely still. The ocean is singing its slow, steady song, and the stars are keeping their silent, watchful vigil over the earth. Breathe in the peace of the quiet night, let go of the heavy burdens you have carried, and allow yourself to drift safely and smoothly into a deep, beautiful, and restorative sleep. Even from afar, the heart feels the heavy pull of the ones we watch walk into the shadows without us. Miles out from the fractured white shoreline of Betio, where the water transitioned from a bright, shallow turquoise into the deep, fathomless indigo of the open Pacific, an armada of gray steel quietly rode the rolling swells. These were the great ships, the destroyers, the cruisers, and the heavy transport vessels that had carried thousands of young men across the vast ocean, acting as their floating homes for so many long, uncertain weeks. Now, with their decks emptied of the Marines who had climbed down the heavy cargo nets and vanished into the smoke, these ships stood as silent sentinels on the water. They were the guardians of the deep, a ring of quiet protectors holding a vigil on the edge of the world. To stand on the deck of one of these massive ships during the long days of the battle was to experience a profound and aching helplessness. The sailors who manned the rails were young, just like the boys on the sand. They wore different uniforms, bathed in the salt spray and the constant, rhythmic hum of the ship's deep engines, but their hearts beat in the exact same anxious cadence. From their vantage point, the island was nothing more than a thin, dark line on the horizon, shrouded in a heavy, unrelenting curtain of gray dust and smoke. They could not see the sunken roads, or the log bunkers, or the faces of the friends they had made during the long voyage. They could only watch the distant flashes of light, feeling the low, vibrating rumble of the conflict travel through the very water and into the steel hulls beneath their feet. The ocean breeze blew constantly out here, cool and indifferent, carrying with it the faint, bitter scent of the distant shoreline. The young sailors leaned against the cold iron railings, their eyes straining against the glare of the sun on the water. Among them was a young seaman named Leo, a boy with sun-bleached hair from the coast of California. For days, Leo had stood his watch with a quiet, agonizing focus. His older brother, a gentle soul who had taught him how to fish in the quiet streams back home, was somewhere inside that distant cloud of smoke. Every morning, Leo would reach into the pocket of his dungarees and touch the folded edge of a letter his brother had written to their mother, a letter he had promised to mail if things went wrong. He didn't read it. He just held it, letting the warmth of his hand press against the paper, a silent, desperate tether of love stretching across the miles of open water. In the dim, red-lit corridors deep within the ships, the quiet heroism of the Navy crews unfolded in small, beautiful routines of care. Down in the galleys, the heat of the ovens mixed with the heavy, humid air of the Pacific. A chief cook named Elias, a man with tired eyes and flour-dusted hands, stood over massive steel bowls, kneading dough with a slow, rhythmic devotion. He was making bread, hundreds and hundreds of soft, warm rolls. There was no one on board to eat them all, but Elias baked them anyway. He baked them with the profound, quiet faith that soon, the boats would return, carrying exhausted, hungry boys who would need the simple, profound comfort of a warm meal. Every loaf he pulled from the oven was an act of hope, a tangible prayer rising into the air, a way of saying, "We are still here, we are waiting for you, and we have kept the home fires burning." Perhaps the heaviest burden of all was carried by the young men who sat in the radio rooms. These were small, windowless spaces, illuminated only by the soft, amber glow of the dials and the tiny, flickering lights of the equipment. The radio operators sat for hours with heavy headsets pressed to their ears, listening to the crackling, static-filled voices drifting up from the beachhead. They could not see the faces of the men speaking, but they could hear the exhaustion, the fear, and the quiet resilience in every strained syllable. A young operator from a quiet town in Oregon sat in the dark, his hand resting gently on the dial, tears welling quietly in his eyes as he listened to a medic on the beach softly calling for supplies. The operator could do nothing but log the message and whisper a soft, unheard word of encouragement into the empty room. He was a keeper of voices, a guardian holding onto the invisible threads of communication that bound the ships to the shore. The bond between the sailors on the water and the Marines on the sand was not forged in shared combat, but in this profound, agonizing separation. It is a beautiful and tragic testament to the human heart that we can care so deeply for those who have walked out of our sight. These young men on the ships did not sleep. They paced the decks under the stars, they cleaned their equipment with meticulous, unnecessary care, and they stood together in the shadows, sharing quiet stories about the boys they had transported. They remembered the way a certain Marine laughed at a joke in the mess hall, or the way another had carefully polished his boots before the landing. These small, brilliant memories became their armor against the uncertainty of the horizon. To deeply explore these hidden, emotional corners of history, to sit in the quiet with the voices of the past and truly understand the depth of their bonds, requires a special kind of space, a sanctuary away from the noise of the modern world. If you feel a gentle pull toward these untold stories and wish to immerse yourself in a community that honors the profound human experience of history, I warmly invite you to join our family on Patreon. There, we offer deep dive, extended narratives, free ad-free podcasts, and a warm, welcoming space for history lovers to connect and reflect. It is a beautiful way to drift deeper into the past, finding comfort in the shared reverence for those who came before us. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Joining us there allows this quiet work of remembrance to continue, keeping the gentle spirits of these guardians alive in our hearts. As the long, agonizing days slowly transitioned into night, the ocean underwent a magnificent and soothing transformation. The sun dipped below the curve of the earth, pulling the harsh, blinding light away and leaving behind a sky painted in deep, bruised shades of violet and indigo. The water, which had been a brilliant, restless blue, now smoothed out into a vast expanse of dark, reflective glass. The massive ships became nothing more than silent, towering silhouettes, their gray paint disappearing into the velvet darkness. The silence out on the deep water was absolute. It was a heavy, peaceful quiet, broken only by the steady, rhythmic wash of the waves against the steel hulls. The ships rolled gently side to side, a slow, hypnotic rocking motion that felt like the steady breathing of a sleeping giant. Up on the open decks, the young sailors felt the cool evening breeze wash over their tired faces. They looked out toward the island, which was now swallowed completely by the night, invisible except for the faint, distant glow of a flare reflecting off the low clouds. In this dark, peaceful expanse, the men found a strange, comforting solace. They realized that the same stars shining down on the polished decks of the destroyers were also shining down on the white coral sands of Betio. They were all wrapped in the exact same blanket of night. A quiet, collective vigil settled over the fleet. Men leaned against the railings, their eyes heavy, their bodies swaying in perfect harmony with the slow roll of the sea. They did not speak, there was no need for words in the dark. They simply sent their thoughts out over the black water, invisible waves of love, hope, and protective warmth traveling toward the unseen shore. Deep within the ship, Leo finally lay down in his narrow canvas bunk. The gentle, rhythmic vibration of the engines hummed through the metal frame, a low, constant lullaby that vibrated in his very bones. He placed his hand over the pocket of his shirt, feeling the familiar, reassuring shape of his brother's letter against his chest. He closed his eyes, and the world shrank to the simple, comforting sound of the water slipping past the hull. He imagined that the ocean was a vast, gentle cradle, holding all of them, the sailors, the Marines, the boys on both sides of the island, in its ancient, watery embrace. The deep blue of the Pacific holds countless stories, whispered secrets of devotion, and quiet prayers that were offered up to the stars in the middle of the night. These guardians of the deep stood their watch so that others might eventually find peace. As you lie in your own bed, safe and warm, let the slow, steady rhythm of the ocean swells guide your breathing. Feel the gentle rocking of the ship beneath you, carrying you safely across the dark water. The vigil is over, the night is calm, and the stars are keeping watch. Let the soothing hum of the deep water wash away the lingering thoughts of your day, and allow yourself to drift slowly, deeply, and beautifully into a profound and restful sleep. Long before the maps of empires were ever drawn, this small ring of coral was simply called home by people who knew the gentle language of the tides. To truly understand the story of this remote Pacific atoll, we must step away from the men in uniform for a moment and look softly upon the gentle souls who had walked these white sands for thousands of years. Before the steel ships arrived, and before the world turned its heavy gaze upon the Pacific, the islands of the Gilbert chain were a peaceful, profound sanctuary. The native Gilbertese people, the Ikiribati, lived in a beautiful, harmonious balance with the vast ocean that surrounded them. Their lives were not measured by the ticking of clocks or the turning of calendar pages, but by the slow, predictable waxing and waning of the moon, the shifting of the trade winds, and the rhythmic, breathing tides of the sea. For these families, the towering coconut palms were not just trees, they were the very center of life. The palm groves provided everything they needed to survive and flourish. The broad, green fronds were woven into the roofs of their homes, sheltering them from the heavy tropical rains. The fibrous husks were spun into strong, durable ropes that bound their nimble outrigger canoes together. The sweet water of the young coconuts quenched their thirst during the long, hot days, and the rich, white meat sustained them. The island was a living, breathing member of their family, a quiet guardian that had protected their ancestors since the beginning of remembered time. But when the dark clouds of the great global conflict began to gather over the Pacific, this ancient, peaceful sanctuary was quietly, tragically disrupted. The islanders found themselves caught in the middle of a terrible storm that they had absolutely no part in creating. As the foreign soldiers arrived, first the Japanese defenders and later the American Marines, the native families watched with a profound, quiet sorrow as their beautiful palm groves were cut down. They saw the ancient, sacred trees that had shaded their grandfathers fell to the earth, their heavy logs used to build bunkers and barricades. It was a heartbreak that went deeper than fear. It was the sorrow of watching one's home being dismantled, piece by piece, by a world they did not understand. When the horizon finally filled with steel, and the earth began to tremble beneath the thunder of the naval guns, the Gilbertese families did what mothers and fathers have done since the dawn of time. They gathered their children close to their chests, and they sought shelter. Many families fled in small outrigger canoes to the neighboring, quieter islets of the atoll, paddling desperately across the dark lagoon under the light of the stars. Others, who could not leave in time, huddled deep in the shallow coral caves or in hand-dug trenches far from the shore, clinging to each other as the very foundation of their island seemed to fracture. In one of these dark, hidden shelters, an elder named Tetek sat on a woven pandanus mat, his arms wrapped tightly around his young grandson. The boy was trembling, his face buried in his grandfather's chest to hide from the terrible noises that shook the dust from the roof of their hiding place. Tetek did not have a weapon, nor did he have walls of steel to protect his family. He only had the quiet, enduring strength of his spirit. To calm the boy, the old man began to hum a low, ancient song of the ocean navigators. He sang softly about the great sea turtles that glide beneath the waves, and the guiding stars that always lead the lost traveler home. His voice was a gentle, steady rumble, a vibration of absolute love that drowned out the chaos above, wrapping the child in an invisible, protective blanket of peace. It is in these terrifying shadows that the purest, most beautiful moments of human kindness often bloom. On the second day of the struggle, a young American Marine, completely exhausted and separated from his squad, stumbled into a dense, ruined thicket of palms where a local family was hiding. The young man's uniform was torn, his face was pale with dust and exhaustion, and his hands shook as he lowered his rifle. He was terrified. The family, huddled together beneath a makeshift shelter of woven fronds, was equally afraid. For a long, breathless moment, two completely different worlds stared at each other through the hazy, tropical heat. But Tetek, sitting with his family, did not see a foreign invader. He looked into the wide, frightened eyes of the Marine and saw a boy no older than his own sons, far from his mother, lost in a world of profound suffering. Slowly, deliberately, the old man reached out his withered hand. He offered the young Marine a piece of fresh, white coconut meat that he had carefully saved for his grandchildren. The Marine, overwhelmed by this sudden, quiet gesture of grace, lowered his head. With trembling fingers, he reached into his canvas pouch and pulled out a small, foil-wrapped piece of chocolate from his rations, pressing it gently into the hands of Tetek's grandson. No words were spoken. They did not share a language, but in that fragile, fleeting moment beneath the shattered palms, they shared a profound and universal understanding. They were all just human beings, caught in the rain, offering each other a small, beautiful piece of comfort to keep the darkness at bay. On the other side of the island, similar, hidden acts of mercy were taking place in the shadows. A local woman, gathering rainwater in a hollowed-out coconut shell, found a young Japanese soldier lying near a fallen tree. He was severely wounded, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow and labored. He was an enemy of the men who were advancing up the beach, but to her, he was simply a broken child of the earth. She knelt softly beside him in the coral sand, lifted his head with a mother's gentle touch, and let the cool, sweet rainwater trickle past his parched lips. The young soldier opened his eyes, recognizing the profound, maternal kindness in her face. He could not speak, but a single, quiet tear slipped down his dust-covered cheek. The native people of the atoll did not take sides in the hatred, they simply wept for the young boys of both armies, their hearts breaking for the immense sorrow that had washed up on their shores. These gentle islanders are the forgotten souls of the conflict. Their quiet bravery, their enduring grace, and their boundless capacity for forgiveness represent a hidden heroism that is rarely written about in the grand books of history. It is fascinating and deeply moving to realize how many secret, hidden acts of humanity shaped the world behind the scenes, far away from the front lines and the headlines of the day. If you find yourself captivated by these forgotten corners of our past, and if you wish to explore the quiet, untold stories of those who altered the course of history from the shadows, I have a beautiful resource for you. I have put together a completely free ebook titled The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. You can receive this gentle, deeply researched exploration of hidden heroes as a gift by joining my quiet, weekly email newsletter. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a thoughtful, peaceful way to deepen your connection to the hidden layers of our past, letting the secret bravery of forgotten souls carry you gently into a restful sleep. When the great storm finally passed, and the heavy silence returned to the atoll, the surviving Gilbert Islands families slowly emerged from their shelters. They walked out onto the white coral sand and looked upon a landscape that had been fundamentally changed. The island was covered in the gray ash of conflict, and the once majestic palm groves lay in ruins. The fibrous trunks of the broken trees wept a clear, sticky sap, as if the island itself was shedding tears for the innocence that had been lost in the fire. It was a sight that would break the spirit of many, a profound and devastating wound upon the earth. But the people of the Pacific possess a resilience that is as deep and enduring as the ocean itself. They did not despair. They knew that the earth, like the human heart, has a miraculous capacity to heal if given the gentle gift of time. Slowly, patiently, they began the long work of returning their sanctuary to life. They gathered the shattered fronds, they smoothed the scarred sand, and they planted new, green shoots of palm trees in the white coral dust. They worked with a quiet, reverent dedication, honoring the memory of the trees that had fallen, and holding on to the beautiful promise that life would eventually bloom again. As they worked, the gentle trade winds blew across the lagoon, rustling through the few palms that remained standing. The sound was no longer a roar of destruction, but a soft, poetic whisper, a soothing melody that spoke of recovery and peace. The islanders listened to the wind, and they found comfort in the knowledge that the ocean would eventually wash the shoreline clean, carrying the sorrows of the past out into the deep, infinite blue. Tonight, as you lie safe and warm in your own bed, let the gentle, enduring spirit of the islanders wash over you. Think of old Tetek humming his ancient song of the sea, a melody of protection and boundless love. Imagine the soft, cool rain falling on the palm leaves, washing away the dust of the day, leaving the world fresh, clean, and renewed. The heavy storms of your own life, the worries and the fears that shake your foundation, will also pass. Like the white coral sands of the Pacific, your spirit is resilient, capable of finding peace and healing after the longest of days. Listen to the steady, rhythmic breathing of the ocean tides. Let the vast, gentle water carry away the tension in your shoulders, the tightness in your chest, and the lingering thoughts in your mind. You are held in a safe, quiet space, protected by the dark, velvety blanket of the night. As the trade winds whisper their ancient lullaby through the leaves, allow your eyes to gently close. Breathe in the cool, sweet air, and let yourself drift away. Drift deeper and deeper into a beautiful, quiet, and profoundly restful sleep, completely at peace with the world, and entirely safe in the gathering shadows of the night. When the great, terrible storm finally breaks, the heaviest and most beautiful silence always falls upon the ones who are left behind to gently gather the pieces. The morning after the island finally fell quiet, a profound and sacred stillness settled over the white coral sands of Betio. The thick, heavy smoke that had choked the sky for days began to slowly thin, carried away by the gentle, sweeping breath of the Pacific trade winds. In its place, a soft, golden sunlight poured down upon the shattered palm groves and the turquoise lagoon. The ocean, which had borne witness to so much sorrow, now returned to its ancient, rhythmic murmuring, the waves washing over the reef in a slow, hypnotic lullaby that seemed to whisper of peace and rest. For the young men who emerged from their shallow trenches and log bunkers, the sudden absence of noise was almost overwhelming. They moved across the scarred landscape with slow, hesitant steps, their bodies weighed down by a deep, systemic exhaustion that reached into their very souls. The frantic, desperate energy of survival had evaporated in the cool morning air, leaving behind a quiet, somber reverence. They were no longer warriors caught in the tide of conflict. They were simply young boys, brothers, and friends, stepping softly across the sand to look for the ones who had not woken up to see the dawn. This was the gathering of the lost, a slow, heartbreaking, and deeply beautiful act of devotion. Across the small island, small groups of men began the solemn task of finding their fallen comrades. They did not speak above a whisper. The air felt too fragile, too holy for loud voices. When they found a friend lying in the white dust, they did not look upon him with the hardened eyes of soldiers. They looked upon him with the absolute, tender care of family. They would kneel slowly in the sand, their hands trembling slightly as they brushed the coral dust away from a familiar face. With quiet, gentle movements, they would cover their friends with canvas ponchos, smoothing the fabric as softly as a mother pulling a blanket over a sleeping child. In these quiet moments of gathering, the true, unguarded humanity of these young men shone like a beacon in the dark. A young private, whose face was still smeared with the gray ash of the battle, sat quietly beside the resting body of his squad leader. The older man had been a guiding light to him, a steady voice of comfort during the long, terrifying voyage across the ocean. The private did not weep openly, he simply sat in the warm sand, holding his friend's cold hand in his own, keeping a silent, loving vigil. He wanted to make sure his friend was not alone in those final hours before he was laid to rest in the earth. It was a profound gesture of loyalty, a quiet promise that the bonds forged in the dark would never be broken by the dawn. As the men worked to prepare the temporary resting places, they became the caretakers of thousands of fragile, personal histories. To identify the fallen, they had to gently reach into the pockets of the uniforms, retrieving the small, precious items that tethered these boys to the world they had left behind. In a small clearing beneath a broken palm tree, a young clerk from a quiet town in Ohio sat on an overturned wooden crate, acting as the guardian of these memories. Beside him rested a pile of small canvas bags, and into each one, he placed the simple, beautiful treasures of a life cut short. His hands, stained with ink and salt, moved with absolute reverence. He held a small, silver locket containing a lock of golden hair. He found a smooth, polished river stone, carried all the way from the mountains of Colorado as a lucky charm. He carefully unfolded letters that had been written by candlelight deep within the holds of the transport ships, letters speaking of apple harvests, of high school sweethearts, and of promises to return before the winter snows. Sometimes, he would find a photograph of a smiling family standing on a front porch, their faces completely oblivious to the immense distance and sorrow that now separated them from the boy in the sand. The young clerk would gently wipe the coral dust from the faces in the photographs, his own eyes welling with quiet tears, feeling the profound, crushing weight of holding a stranger's entire universe in the palm of his hand. This profound tenderness was not reserved only for their own. The deep, shared exhaustion of the battle had washed away the bitter lines of enmity, leaving behind a universal recognition of shared suffering. A group of Marines, clearing a path near a shattered log bunker, found the resting bodies of several young Japanese defenders. They did not pass them by. They stopped, their faces softening with a quiet, respectful sorrow. They recognized that these boys, too, were far from home, that they too had mothers waiting for them across the infinite blue water. With gentle hands, the Marines gathered the scattered, personal belongings of the defenders, a small, silk flag inscribed with well wishes from neighbors, a beautifully painted paper fan, a tiny, carved wooden amulet. They placed these items carefully beside the young men, offering a silent, shared prayer for their peaceful journey back to the mists of their homeland. In the face of such profound loss, the human heart cannot help but recognize itself in the mirror of another's sorrow. To preserve these incredibly fragile, deeply personal moments from the fading mist of time is a quiet, devoted labor of love. The true history of Tarawa is not found in the grand movements of fleets, but in the soft brushing of coral dust from a photograph, the silent comfort of holding a fallen friend's hand, and the gentle gathering of unmailed letters. It takes an immense amount of patient research, sifting through old, faded journals and quiet archives late into the night, to bring these voices back to you each evening in a way that brings comfort and rest. If you find a sense of peace in these gentle journeys, and if they help you unwind in the quiet hours of the night, please consider supporting this work with a small tip on Ko-Fi. Even a gift as simple as $1 helps sustain the massive time, dedication, and care required to craft these soothing historical sanctuaries for your sleep. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Your gentle support allows us to keep wandering through these historical twilights together, ensuring that the beautiful, quiet spirits of these young men are never lost to the passing of the years. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, the work of gathering slowly transformed into the work of saying goodbye. In small, cleared patches of white sand, long rows of simple wooden crosses and stars of David began to appear, fashioned from the shattered wood of the island's palms. The men gathered around these newly made sanctuaries, removing their helmets, their heads bowed in the fading light. A young chaplain, a man with tired, kind eyes and a voice as soft as the ocean breeze, moved slowly among the rows. He carried a small, worn Bible, its pages softened by the humidity of the Pacific. He did not speak of grand victories or historical necessity. He simply read the ancient, comforting words of the Psalms, his voice a gentle, rhythmic hum that floated over the heads of the grieving men. He spoke of still waters, of green pastures, and of the profound, eternal rest that lay beyond the shadows of the valley. As he spoke, the young men wept. They wept quietly, their tears falling into the dry coral sand, a release of all the fear, the tension, and the love they had held inside for so many endless days. The chaplain moved to each grave, his hand resting gently on the top of every rough-hewn cross, offering a personal, whispered blessing for the boy sleeping beneath the earth. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking farewell, a collective embrace that wrapped the fallen in a blanket of absolute love before they were left to the keeping of the island. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, it pulled the brilliant colors of the day away, leaving behind a sky of deep, bruised violet and indigo. The evening shadows stretched out across the white sand, cooling the earth and bringing a profound, heavy peace to the atoll. The survivors returned to their quiet camps, leaving the makeshift cemeteries behind. But the fallen were not alone. As the deep velvet darkness of the night settled over Betio, the magnificent canopy of the Pacific stars began to emerge. They shone with a brilliant, steady light, casting a soft, silver glow over the rows of wooden crosses. The gentle trade winds blew through the remaining palm fronds, a soft, poetic sigh that felt like a mother's comforting breath. And all around them, the vast, eternal ocean continued its slow, steady song, a timeless lullaby rocking the shores of the island. The young men who rested beneath the white coral sand were finally free from the heavy burdens of the world. They were completely safe now, cradled in the warm embrace of the earth, surrounded by the infinite, protective blue of the sea. They had found their sanctuary, a place where no storm could ever reach them again. As you lie in your own bed, feeling the soft weight of your blankets and the quiet safety of your room, let the immense peace of the island wash over you. Let go of the heavy things you have been carrying today. The work of gathering is done, the day is over, and the world has grown entirely still. Listen to the gentle, rhythmic breathing of the ocean tides, the slow, steady rise and fall of the water. Let it match the rhythm of your own breathing. Allow your thoughts to drift away on the cool night breeze, floating out into the beautiful, starry expanse of the sky. You are safe, you are warm, and you are watched over. Close your eyes, let the silence hold you, and allow yourself to drift slowly, beautifully, and deeply into a profoundly restful sleep. Even when the world seems to have moved on entirely, the earth softly holds onto the memories we leave behind, keeping them completely safe until we are ready to find them again. Decades have slipped away since the great storm finally quieted over the Tarawa Atoll, passing like the gentle, rhythmic turning of the ocean tides. The island of Betio, once stripped bare and scarred by the heavy machinery of the world, has long since healed its wounds. The tropical sun and the immense, nurturing rains of the Pacific have brought the green back to the white coral sands. New groves of coconut palms stretch high into the blue sky, their long, elegant fronds catching the trade winds and singing a soft, rustling lullaby over the earth. The turquoise lagoon is perfectly clear and calm, reflecting the fluffy white clouds that drift lazily across the horizon. If you were to walk along the shoreline today, the water would lap warmly at your feet, carrying no trace of the heavy shadows that once fell upon this tiny speck of land. But while the island found its peace, there were places far across the vast ocean where a quiet, enduring ache remained. In small farmhouses nestled in the snowy valleys of the American Midwest, and in the mist-shrouded wooden homes of rural Japan, families grew older. The mothers and fathers who had waited for letters that never came eventually saw their own hair turn silver. They kept porch lights burning a little longer in the evenings. They placed fresh flowers next to framed black and white photographs on the mantelpiece, looking into the young, smiling faces of boys who would forever remain 19 or 20 years old. Over the years, the sharp, piercing grief softened into a gentle, loving sorrow. It became a quiet companion, a space in the heart reserved solely for the sons and brothers who had crossed the deep blue water and simply never returned. These families knew that their boys were resting somewhere beneath the eternal Pacific stars, but there is a profound, human need to close the circle, to bring the lost ones back to the warmth of the home they so deeply loved. And so, generations later, long after the ships had rusted and the world had changed, a new kind of gathering began on the white sands of Betio. Small groups of dedicated, patient people began to return to the atoll. They did not come with the heavy boots and the deafening noise of the past. They came in absolute peace, walking softly across the coral dust with a deep, sacred reverence for the ground beneath their feet. These were historians, archaeologists, and forensic specialists, men and women who had dedicated their lives to a beautiful, singular mission, to find the lost boys of the Pacific and bring them home. They worked in the stifling tropical heat, just as the young men had done decades before, but their tools were completely different. Instead of weapons, they carried small hand trowels, soft bristled brushes, and fine wooden screens. They moved the earth with a painstaking, meticulous care, treating every grain of sand as if it were a precious jewel. When they dug beneath the roots of the new palm trees or sifted through the soil near the old, forgotten seawalls, they worked in a reverent silence. They were searching for the faintest whispers of the past, a rusted metal canteen, a frayed piece of canvas webbing, or the faint, unmistakable shape of a small brass button. In one of these quiet, shaded excavations, near what used to be the edge of the sunken roads, a young woman knelt in the warm sand, her brush moving rhythmically, softly sweeping away the white coral dust. For hours, there was only the sound of the wind and the distant wash of the waves. And then, a tiny glint of silver caught the afternoon sun. She stopped, her breath catching slightly in her throat. With infinite tenderness, she used her fingertips to gently loosen the surrounding earth, lifting the small object from the resting place it had occupied for over 70 years. It was a signet ring. It was heavily tarnished, the silver darkened by decades of resting in the salty earth, but its shape was perfect and unbroken. On its flat face, worn smooth by the passage of time and the touch of a nervous thumb, a single initial was deeply engraved. Beside the ring lay the fragile, resting remains of the young man who had worn it. He had been a boy from a quiet town in the mountains, a boy who had carried his father's ring across the vast ocean to remind him of the cool, pine-scented air and the safety of his family's embrace. He had kept it with him through the long, terrifying nights, holding onto it as a physical tether to the people he loved. Now, after a lifetime of waiting, that tether had finally been found. Holding a physical piece of history in your hand, a ring, a photograph, a worn piece of fabric, is an incredibly moving experience. It collapses the immense distance of time, bridging the gap between the present moment and the quiet, beating hearts of those who lived so many years ago. It reminds us that history is not an abstract concept. It is made of real people who loved, who feared, and who hoped, just as we do today. If you feel moved by this profound, enduring connection to the past, and if you wish to keep the memory of these brave souls alive in your own space, there are beautiful ways to honor them. For those who find comfort in holding onto history, I warmly recommend exploring the World War II memorabilia available on Amazon, or taking a quiet evening to watch the deeply moving, visual tribute of the movie Midway on Prime. Having a tangible piece of history or immersing yourself in these cinematic retellings is a gentle, respectful way to keep their stories alive. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. It is a thoughtful, peaceful way to ensure that the quiet courage of those distant generations is never forgotten, allowing their memory to bring you a sense of profound resilience and peace tonight. The journey of that silver signet ring did not end in the coral dust of Betio. It was carefully, lovingly placed in a small, velvet-lined box, treated with the utmost dignity and respect. And then, it began the long journey backward across the deep blue water. It flew high above the endless, rolling swells of the Pacific, tracing the exact same path that the massive, gray transport ships had taken so many decades before. But this time, the journey was not filled with fear or uncertainty. It was a journey of healing, a quiet flight of return. Thousands of miles away, in a quiet living room softly illuminated by the golden light of an autumn afternoon, an older woman sat waiting. She had never met the young man who wore the ring. He was her grandfather, a man she only knew from the gentle, whispered stories her mother had told her, and from the fading photograph of a handsome, smiling boy in a green uniform that sat on her bookshelf. When the small velvet box was gently placed into her hands, the room grew incredibly still. She opened the lid, and her eyes fell upon the tarnished silver. With trembling fingers, she lifted the ring from its velvet bed. It was surprisingly heavy, carrying the weight of all the years it had rested in the Pacific sand. She traced the engraved initial with her thumb, feeling the exact same smooth surface that her grandfather had touched in the dark, lonely hours of the night. In that quiet, beautiful moment, the vast, seemingly insurmountable chasm of time completely vanished. She brought the cold silver to her cheek, and she wept. They were not tears of bitter sorrow, but tears of absolute, overwhelming relief. The circle, broken for over 70 years, was finally, peacefully closed. The boy who had left the snowy mountains so long ago had finally, truly come home. There is a profound, comforting beauty in knowing that no one is ever truly lost. The universe, in all its vastness, holds onto the pieces of our lives with a gentle, patient grace, waiting for the right moment to guide them back to where they belong. The young men who rested on the island of Betio for all those years were never forgotten by the earth, and they are not forgotten by us. Back on the tiny, emerald atoll, the sun begins its slow, majestic descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of soft violet, warm amber, and deep, restful indigo. The shadows of the tall, swaying palm trees stretch long across the pristine white sand, cooling the earth as the evening approaches. The gentle trade winds blow in from the open ocean, rustling the leaves with a sound like a long, contented sigh. The ocean, the great, eternal guardian of the deep blue, continues its slow, rhythmic breathing. The waves roll toward the outer reef, rising and falling in a timeless, hypnotic cadence. It is the same soothing lullaby that has echoed across this water since the dawn of the world, a song of immense peace and boundless love. The water washes over the coral, pulling the fine white sand back into the deep, cleansing the shore and leaving it smooth, perfect, and untouched. As you lie in your bed, let the heavy burdens of your own day be washed away by the gentle, rolling tide of this story. Imagine the cool, sweet evening breeze blowing softly across your face, carrying away any lingering worries or tension. The long journey is completely over. The lost have been found, the broken circles have been made whole, and the world has grown incredibly quiet and still. Listen to the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Let it match the rise and fall of the ocean swells. In and out, slow and deep. You are held in a safe, warm space, surrounded by the quiet, protective shadows of the night. There is nowhere else you need to be, and nothing else you need to do. The past is safely at rest, and the present is entirely peaceful. Allow your muscles to completely soften, melting down into the comfort of your mattress. Let your mind untether, floating freely out over the calm, starlit waters of the Pacific. Drift away into the deep, velvet blue of the night. Let the gentle waves carry you softly, beautifully, and safely into a profound, healing, and endless sleep.